So this is the second primary source assignment again. This is where we left off at the end of the last video. If you haven't done it, it will be immediately above the video that you are watching now on the screen. I hope you're enjoying working with these primary sources. I took a class on this this last summer, and I thought it was a little different way of doing things and something you might enjoy that was a little out of the norm for what we've been doing in this class. So, primaries, caucuses, and delegates. So as we learned, these have been around, but they've only really started to take off, I guess is the right word, in the last 20, 30 years. So New Hampshire has the first in the nation primary. And a primary is a lot like a general election. A primary, you're going to go into your polling place, wherever that might be, and you'll ask for, if you live in Illinois, if you don't vote in Illinois, I don't hold me to this, but in Illinois anyway, you go in and you ask for a Republican or a Democratic, or if you're in one of 7 counties where the Libertarian Party is established, Libertarian ballot, and you cast a vote for the slate of candidates running for that party. You can't, in Illinois, ask for any others. Okay, so Iowa, I'll let you click on these links on your own. I do suggest you click on these links and at the very least watch this YouTube video. Iowa has a caucus. So a caucus is a little bit different. How it very generally works anyway. They all do it a little differently. So this explanation isn't going to hold for every instance. You'll be in a big open space, maybe like a gym, and they'll divide you up. They'll say who votes for everybody will make their pitches for a couple hours, or hopefully a little less than that, but usually is a couple hours, about why their candidate is the best to be president of the United States. Then they'll say, all right, maybe they'll put candidates' faces on the floor, and they'll say, okay, whoever supports Bernie Sanders, go stand on Bernie Sanders' face in the gym. I mean, it's a way to do it. And 35% of the people do. Whoever supports Elizabeth Warren, stand on her. 10% of the people do. Whoever supports Kamala Harris, 5%. Whoever supports Joe Biden, I don't know where it would shake out this way, but just a hypothetical example. So nobody's got over 50%. Typically, it'd be the lowest vote share gets eliminated. All right. And they'll do it again until there's a winner, per se. So they might, say 1% of the vice president's delegates go to Biden. Biden wins. Let's say the other 4 go to Sanders. In some cases, they might allocate delegates that way. Who had 51% of the votes gets how many? 51% of the delegates, 39. In some cases, they might even just keep going until there's one candidate. There's no one size fits all, is what I'm trying to get at for a caucus. So a presidential primary, again, voters will indicate who they want for the nominee for president directly by vote or indirectly through the choice of delegates to the presidential nominating convention. All right, so I would know that. And what that means, the indirectly bit, I'm not sure where the pen is. Okay, indirectly. So oftentimes when you're voting for president, even in the primaries, you're not necessarily just casting a vote for Ted Cruz or Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren or whoever it is. You're voting for a slate of electors to go to the nominating convention to say 51% of Illinoisans want Joe Biden for president and 49% want Bernie Sanders. Some states will do it like that. So the difference here, the big difference between a primary and a caucus, is that a caucus is a system of local gatherings where voters decide which candidate to support and select delegates for the nominating convention. This was what I was explaining up here. A primary is statewide. It's a statewide voting process in which the voters cast secret ballots for their preferred candidates. So guys, I'm telling you, at the very least, know the definition of what a primary is and what a caucus is based on this slide. Very important slide. I'd look at the links. I don't want to get copyright flagged, which is why I'm not doing it with you right now, because NBC, I've had a little trouble with that. Politico usually is okay. YouTube, I can't play a YouTube video on a YouTube video. That is a recipe for disaster. So was this the case in 1920? Yeah. Like I said, they did have primaries, caucuses. This was just when the system was really starting to develop. There wasn't so much of it, that was really taken as gospel. Like, this is what we will do. The voters say this, so this is what must be. The results might count. The results really only counted if the party boss liked what they were. So in our case, in 1920, if they liked that Warren Harding won the Ohio primary or caucus or whatever Ohio did at the time, yeah, that result would stick. The voters chose Harding. Well, we like Harding anyway, so the voters' wishes and our wishes are lining up. But in the case of the Republicans, none of the candidates that participated in those contests got the nomination for president. That wouldn't happen today. There would be quite literally probably riots in the streets if the Republican, Democratic, Green, Libertarian, whoever else party nominated somebody that wasn't running in the primary. That just wouldn't happen. The will of the people is much more important today than it was then. So then we go to conventions. So Republicans and Democrats both need to secure just a simple majority of delegates to become their party's presumptive nominee. So the presumptive nominee, because they have to be nominated and confirmed at the convention. So, like, you see this tweet over here by President Biden, now President Biden. Folks, tonight we secured the 1,991 delegates needed to win the Democratic nomination. Okay, so the 1,991, that's 50% plus one delegate. I'm going to spend every day fighting to earn your vote so that together we can win the battle for the soul of this nation. That was his big campaign pitch. So he became the presumptive nominee because contests were still going. He was the nominee anyway, but he didn't officially become the Democratic nominee until the Democratic convention. And, well, it wasn't anywhere. It was online. So that was when they made him the official nominee. It's a slight distinction, but a very important one. The presumptive nominee and the nominee. It's almost semantics, but it's important to understand the difference in the language there. So the party delegates, the representatives, and anybody really can be a party delegate. You just register for the convention and show up. At least on the state level. The national level, I've never been to a national convention, I have to confess. But you just register and with your state party, and you go as a delegate if you want to do that. And you meet at conventions after the primary elections, where the presumptive nominees are. And this is now to codify the winner. Back in Harding's day, there were floor fights and things of that nature. And, as we saw, if you did okay in the primaries, but you didn't quite pull enough delegates, you weren't going to get nominated. But there might be a floor fight. And I mean, there was more of a chance for a surprise back in the day. So the party's delegates at the convention choose the party candidates based on the primary votes and the caucus votes too, but just the pre-general election votes. In states that don't hold primaries, delegates are chosen by state party leaders. And larger states send more delegates to the conventions than smaller states do. Obviously, a bigger population should have more representation. So the chairperson would call the convention to order. Keynote speaker or speakers address the convention. A committee will present the party platform as a written statement outlining the party's views on important issues with a plan. Now, the party platform isn't, to my mind, all that important. We were talking when we studied political parties about candidate-centered politics. And that's really kind of where we're at now. So what the party believes and what the party puts forward doesn't necessarily have to have a whole lot of bearing on what actually ends up coming out of a candidate's mouth who's running for president. But this is still something they do. So delegates will vote on and finalize the platform, and then the party chooses its candidate for president. So these delegates that come to the party conventions, they end up nominating the candidates, and after candidates are nominated, so these are usually all the candidates that participated in the primary, unless one just drops out. Balloting begins. So to win in 2020, Joe Biden needed to receive a majority, as I said, of the delegates' votes at convention. And that figure made it to 1,991 delegates of 4,051. Pledged delegates to secure the Democratic nomination. Pledged. The Democratic Party does this thing with super delegates. So like former President Clinton and Obama and Carter, and just the Democratic luminaries, state leaders, state governors who are Democratic could show up to this convention, and they have a vote. They have a voice in this. So these are called super delegates. Don't worry about it for test purposes, but the Republicans don't do that. But there's been some complaining in recent years about these super delegates because they do throw the outcome into question sometimes. And the vice presidential candidate is really chosen in the same way. She, in this case, was picked by Joe Biden as the running mate, and Vice President Harris won the nomination in that way. It didn't always used to be like that. The candidate didn't always have to point and say, that's the guy, and then that was the vice president. There used to be floor fights over this position as well. It's calmed down in more recent years. Now it's just who the candidate wants, who the candidate prefers. That's the guy or gal who becomes vice president. The vice presidential nominee, anyway, not the vice president. That's only if they win the election. So was this the case in 1920? No. Unlike elections today, as we talked about, no one was really sure who was going to come out as the nominee at either party's convention in 1920. Harding won the nomination on the 10th vote of the delegates. And if you've ever been to a convention, the one I went to in 2018, when I was still vice chairman, that took a couple hours just to get through 3 rounds of voting to choose a delegate. But Harding's opponent, Governor Cox of Ohio, he was chosen as the Democratic nominee. That took the Democrats 44 ballots to get there. Can you imagine? Because a round of voting, I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy to have to sit through a round of voting at a convention. Not a fun process. So today, though, the convention typically respects the choice of the candidate they nominate for president, and the candidate has always been nominated for the vice presidential nomination by acclamation. And what that means, someone bangs a gavel and says, all those in favor of nominating Senator Kamala Harris of California as the vice presidential nominee for our party, signify by saying aye. Now, they did it virtually this year, but normally there'd be a bunch of people packed in a convention hall, and they all go aye, and then the chairman would ask all opposed, and no one would make a noise. But in 1920, so this wasn't always the case, but in 1920, the Republicans first offered the vice presidential nomination to California Senator Hiram Johnson. Senator Johnson turned it down. Irvin Lenroot of Wisconsin also turned it down. The vice presidential job has not always been a great thing. It really only, to my mind anyway, another political science instructor might tell you something different. To my mind, the vice presidential slot only started to become worth something after Cheney, after Vice President Cheney, who was Bush Jr.'s vice president, for you youngsters in the crowd. So Illinois Senator Meadow McCormick got up to nominate Irvin Lenroot when a spontaneous demonstration broke out in favor of the candidacy of Calvin Coolidge. So Coolidge had some support there, and both Lenroot and Coolidge were placed into nomination, and Coolidge blew it out of the water, 674 votes in favor to the 146 votes cast in favor of Senator Lenroot. So after the parties select their nominees for president, vice president, they go out campaigning, seeking votes from all citizens, and that's what happened up until the November election. So in 2020, we had Donald Trump, President Trump, and Vice President Pence facing off against now President Biden and Vice President Harris, Libertarian Joe Jorgensen and Jeremy Cohen, and the Greens fielded Howie Hawkins and Angela Walker. Now, there were other candidates, many other candidates. I left off because these 4 had a clear path to 270 electoral votes. We were on the ballot in all 50 states. The Libertarians, that is. The Greens, I believe, were, if they didn't get there, they were darn close to getting on the ballot in all 50 states. So that's why I only include those 4. Because those were the 4 that could have feasibly become president. You can't become president if you get less than 270 electoral votes. Say what you will about the popular vote. They had a path, these 4 tickets. So then you have the debates that occurred during the general election season. The major parties will typically hold 2 or 3 debates during a general election campaign season. And if you want, you could watch the presidential highlights anyway, not the whole thing. Highlights from the first presidential debate of the 2020 cycle. This was an interesting debate cycle. We'll just leave it there. The minor party candidates will hold their own debates from time to time. Last time this happened was in 2012, where like all the minor party candidates, that is, all the third parties will do it internally. But what like the Justice Party, the Constitution, Green, Libertarian, all those got together in a room in 2012 in Chicago with the late, great Larry King and had their own debate. And that is also on YouTube floating around somewhere. You can search that out for yourself if you are so moved to see it. So was this the case in 1920? So candidates didn't have debates like we know today. They communicated with the public in very different ways, one of which we'll discuss in just a moment. So this is the last primary source activity I would like you to do. I will place it right under the video, as I have with the other two primary source activities. And I want you to go to town on this. You'll record your answers to Flipgrid. I know I've cut the other two videos off when we got to a primary source activity. We're going to keep going because there's just a few slides left. So this is how the election of 1920 turned out. Harding blew it out of the water. 16 million votes to Cox's 9,404,000 electoral votes. That's a pretty good sweep. To Cox's 127. Compared to the 2020 election, 74 million popular votes for President Trump, 81 million for President Biden, and we had a 232 to 306 split in the Electoral College in favor of Biden. So the Electoral College being what decides the election of a president. Ultimately, Joe Biden became the 45th president of the United States. These are a list of references. So that is it for our study of campaigns and nominations. Any questions, comments, concerns, email me. All right. Thank you, guys.